Hi, Computer Science 2 class. It's Mrs. Miskin again, and we're going to go over lesson 16 this time in code.org. Hopefully you are starting to get the hang of all of these lessons and the different ways that we code. Lesson 16 is on collision detection. So kind of think of this as like the game Battleship. You're trying to figure out if things are touching each other. Okay, so we have some new blocks. We have one sprite.isTouching and then sprite.debug. Okay, that will allow us to find some problems or fix things if something's going wrong. So we're going to mostly use the isTouching to determine if a sprite is touching another sprite or something else. Okay, so let's look at the frog jumping in this example. Okay, so when the mushroom touches the frog, something happens. It turns to the side. Okay, so we need some kind of a block that will determine if they are touching. Go ahead and finish on that one. And we'll go on to screen number 3. Okay, a balloon. The code below uses the sprite's X and Y positions to check whether they are touching. So let's look at what this code looks like. Whoa. If this and this and this, wow, this code just goes on and on and on. That looks really, really messy and complicated. Okay, use the arrow keys to move the tack until it touches the balloon. Okay, so we don't need to change any code. I'm just gonna hit run and move the arrow keys for the tack to touch the balloon. Okay, and when it touches it, it changes the animation to a pop symbol. Okay, but this is all checking. So if tack X is greater than balloon X and tack X minus balloon X is less than tack dot width divided by 2. Oh my goodness, that just keeps on going and going and going. Okay, so there's so many different conditions to determine X and Y positions to see if they are touching each other, which is super complicated. We need something a little simpler. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit finish on this one. Let's go on to 4 and use that new block. Okay, is touching. We don't want to use that math, but we do need to be able to figure out if one sprite is touching another one. So here is our example. Inside the draw loop, drag the is touching block into the if block. I can hit show me where if I need to. Okay, so here's our if statement, and the comment above says check if tack is touching balloon. Okay, so in our sprites toolbox, we now have a block that says sprite.isTouching and then target. So we're going to move that into our if statement. That's the condition that we want to check. If our balloon is the sprite, and then the target is the tack, that's what it tells us in our instructions. Okay, then we set the animation to the popped. Okay, and that's all. This block is way easier to code and to use than all of those X and Y and division and everything else that was in the last level. Okay, so now if I hit run, it should do the exact same thing. Okay, all right, so I moved the tack and it hovered over the balloon. Once it touched, then it popped. Well, it changed its animation to pop. Same thing, right? Okay, number 5. Applesauce. When the apple hits the blender should turn on. Okay, use the is touching block to make the blender shake back and forth when the apple sprite touches the blender sprite. This shaking motion is already coded using the random block, so you just have to check when the 2 sprites are touching. Okay, so I'm going to come back up to that. Let's look at, okay, so here is that code that it was telling us about. To make it shake, the blender X has a setting to the random number setting already. So we don't need to do that. But here in line 10, the if statement hasn't been completed. We need to grab the if or is touching and determine if the apple is touching the blender. Okay, let's see if that works. the apple comes down and the blender starts shaking back and forth when the apple touches it. But did you see the apple continue to move down? So it looked like it was going behind the blender. Our challenge question, can you make the apple disappear when it touches the blender? Do we have a block that changes whether or not you can see a sprite? Yes, we do. Sprite.visible. We're going to pull that in there, and we want the apple. Its visibility, we want it to be false, so 0. Let's give that a try. Okay, so now it kind of looks like it's going inside of the blender, and it disappears. You don't see it falling behind it. Okay, that wasn't too hard. Let's go on to number 6. You can also use code to play a blender sound. Okay, use the play sound block from the world drawer to play this sound when the apple touches the blender. So we already have the if statement set up to determine if the apple is touching the blender, it moves, the apple disappears, and now we're going to play a sound. So we're going to grab this play sound and put it under here in our if statement. And then we just want to copy this URL. So highlight that address inside the quotation mark, and then come down here, and we want to paste it inside the quotation marks here. Now let's give that a try. Okay, so it did 3 different things. The blender started to shake, the apple disappeared, and the sound played. Okay, that's great. Let's go ahead and finish that one. Number 7, when the rainbow touches the horse, it should turn into a unicorn. Okay, so use the if, is touching, and set animation blocks to change the horse sprite's image when the rainbow touches it. The unicorn image is already loaded. Okay, so we have a variable here. Our sprite is horse. And then we have a rainbow sprite also that is moving. And here's our draw function. So I'm just going to hit run to see what's happening. The rainbow comes up, it goes right over the horse and keeps going, nothing happens. So we need to add in our if statement. So we're going to check and see if the rainbow is touching the horse. So let's go to sprites and grab the is touching. And we want to say if the rainbow is touching horse. Okay, and all we want to do in here is change the horse sprite's image to the unicorn animation. So we don't need to add another sprite variable or anything like that. We're just changing animation. So we already have the horse sprite. We're going to change horse to the unicorn. Okay, let's see how that works. Okay, easy. Okay, number 8. Debugging collisions. The balloon is popping before the tack touches it. When sprites aren't doing what you expect, you can use the debug block to get more information. Okay, so let's hit run. And I'm going to remove the tack, and wow, it pops way, way too soon. Okay. In the code below, change balloon.debug equals false to balloon.debug equals true. So we're looking at line number 3, balloon.debug. We want to change that to true so that we can see what's happening. Why is it doing that? Oh, okay, now look, we've got a big box around the balloon. Okay, so that's our debug. So it looks like the edges of that animation are way further away from the balloon than they should be. Okay, now this one just says add a new debug block to the code, set the tack sprite's debug property to true. Okay, so we want to add a debug for the tack also. So let's pull that in here. And we want that to be true. And we'll run that again. And okay, so you see the outline around the tack, that's really, really close to the edges. But the balloon, there's just a lot of space. That's why it's changing that animation way too soon. Okay, can we use the animations tab to resize the balloon picture so that it pops at the correct time? Well, sure, we want to do that. So let's go to animation and look at our balloon here. Okay, so we have all this space around it. Okay, can we maybe crop the sprite? Okay, just by clicking that, that took off all of the edge. All right, so we want to go ahead and go back then to our code. Let's take a look when we hit run. Okay, do you see how that line is so close to the balloon now? So when I move the tack, it's not going to pop too soon, not till it gets into that space. Okay, so sometimes our animation has a little extra space or different things like that that we might need to adjust. Okay, so that's all we need to do on number 8. Let's look at 9 on 16, scoreboard, where we can also use is touching to decide whether we should increase the score. The score is stored inside the score variable. Okay, it's displayed on the screen using the text block. I can hit show me where, and it goes down to the very bottom, okay, where we have some of the drawing blocks to display the score. So right here, line 19 displays the word score because it's in quotation marks. Okay, but underneath it on line 20, there is no quotation marks and it has the variable name score. So it will put the actual variable here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and hit run to see what happens. So a caret, we've got a caret just looping back and forth. We've got a bunny, and then we've got a score variable here at the top. Nothing's happening. So let's look. We need to use the if and is touching blocks to determine if the bunny is can catch the caret. So I believe here that the bunny, all of the code in here has already been put in for you to move the bunny. So if I hit up, the bunny goes up to the top and down. That kind of looks like the frog one that we did in the last lesson, right? Okay, so the bunny goes up, but nothing happens when it touches the caret. Okay, so let's go ahead and reset and look at what we need to do here. Use if and is touching. Okay, so we've got some comments down at the bottom of our draw loop that tells us where we should add that. So we want an if. And if the bunny is touching the caret, okay, we want it to do 3 different things. First, use the counter pattern on the score variable to increase the score. Okay, we already have the variable created. So now we just need to increase it by putting score equals counter variable uses a Boolean math expression, score plus 1. Okay, all right, second thing, reset the caret's X position off the right-hand side of the screen. Okay, so remember it's already looping. So when we touch it, we don't want it to keep looping to the other side before it resets. So if we want to have it change to the right-hand side of the screen, we need the sprite X or the caret. Okay, and then the right-hand side of the screen, if I hit show grid, over here, the X is 400. Okay, and then the third instruction, set the caret's Y position to a random number between 10 and 390. Okay, so we just pulled that in here also. Change it to caret, and then we want a random number. between 10 and 390. Okay, because we don't want it to go too far up on the top or on the bottom where we have the little grass level, don't we? Okay, so let's go ahead and hit run. Okay, so now when I make the bunny jump, okay, and I touched it, my score changed to 1, the carrot reset. Okay, so that's all I need to do on this one. Now the carrot's resetting, my score is increasing, and that's just how that game is played. So very simple. All right, go ahead and hit finish on that one. And let's go to screen number 10. All right, so this is our mushroom and our frog game again. Now that we know how to use is touching and play sound and some different things, this one just wants us to add a couple of effects, including a scoreboard if we wanted to. Okay, and we know how to do a scoreboard if we go back to number 9, because there is a scoreboard in the top left corner of the bunny catching the carrot. Okay, so we could go back to that. I'm going to let you do this one because you can add whatever effects you want. I would probably suggest doing something down here. Needs to be before the draw sprites, but just put an if statement in here and check if they are touching. You can do a play sound. You can rotate. You can change the velocity. You can do all different kinds of things. So you would just drag in an if statement and then check if your sprite is touching in we want the frog and the mushroom. Okay, and then you would put other blocks in here. All right, so you can go ahead and do that one on your own. This has been lesson 16 in code.org.